My name is Rebecca Marshall. I'm 52 years old. When I was 31, my parents told me they were cutting me out of their lives to focus on my brother's needs. Jason was 34, unemployed for the third time, and living in their basement with a failed business and a string of creditors. I had a master's degree, a stable job, and a mortgage I paid on time. They said I didn't need them anymore. They said Jason did. For 15 years, I built a life without them. I didn't call. I didn't visit. I didn't ask for anything. Then, on a Tuesday morning in October, my mother called me for the first time in over a decade. Her voice was shaking. She said the IRS had seized their house. She said they needed help. She said my brother had destroyed them. She asked if I knew a good attorney. I did. I also knew I didn't owe them a single thing. But before I tell you what I said to her on that call, let me take you back to the day they told me I wasn't their daughter anymore. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where family loyalty has a price and karma never forgets an address. If you're new here, this is a story about the daughter who became invisible so her brother could stay comfortable. Hit subscribe because what comes around always comes back around. Let's get into it. I grew up in Wilmington, Delaware, tree-lined streets, brick colonials with front porches, the kind of neighborhood where people left their garage doors open and waved when you drove past. My father, Robert Marshall, was a regional manager for Atlantic Telecom. My mother, Susan, taught kindergarten at Bancroft Elementary, 3 blocks from our house on Maple Ridge Road. There were 2 of us kids, Jason, born April 1970, me, Rebecca, born November 1973. 3 years apart but galaxies different. Jason was what teachers called bright but unmotivated. He tested in the 95th percentile on standardized exams. He just didn't turn in homework. He graduated high school with a 2.4 GPA, and a vague plan to figure things out. He enrolled at Delaware Tech for computer science, dropped out after 1 semester. He tried again 2 years later for business management, made it 3 months. By the time he was 26, he'd worked at 6 different places: sporting goods store, car wash, landscaping crew, pizza delivery, retail at Best Buy, and a 3-week stint at a call center he quit because the supervisor didn't understand his potential. I was different. Valedictorian at Wilmington High School, class of 1991. Full academic scholarship to University of Delaware. Bachelor's in Finance, graduated summa cum laude in 1995. Master's in Accounting from Villanova, 1997. CPA license at 25. By the time I was 28, I was a senior auditor at Kellerman & Associates in Philadelphia, doing compliance work for pharmaceutical companies and medical device manufacturers. I bought a condo in Haverford in 2001. 1 bedroom, hardwood floors, a view of the train tracks. I paid $140,000 for it with a down payment I'd saved over 3 years. I drove a 1998 Honda Civic I'd bought used and kept running with regular oil changes and a mechanic I trusted. My parents were proud of me the way you're proud of a microwave that heats food correctly. Expected, functional, not worth mentioning at dinner parties. Jason, though. Jason was their story, their redemption project. The one who just needed the right opportunity, the right mentor, the right break. They talked about him like he was on the verge of something. They never specified what. In 2004, Jason started a business. He called it Tech Revive. The concept was refurbishing outdated electronics, laptops, monitors, printers, and reselling them online through eBay and a website he built himself. He registered it as an LLC in Delaware and listed my parents' home address as the business headquarters, 847 Maple Ridge Road, Wilmington, Delaware, 19803. He asked my father for $15,000 to get started. Inventory costs, he said. Website hosting. Business licenses. Marketing. My father wrote the check. No promissory note. No repayment schedule. Just a handshake and a belief that this time would be different. The business set up shop in my parents' basement. Jason filled the garage with inventory, stacks of monitors, keyboards, outdated Dell laptops he'd bought in bulk from corporate liquidation sales. My mother complained about the clutter, but never told him to move it. My father said he was building something real. I visited on holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter if I wasn't traveling. I'd sit at the dining room table and listen to my father talk about Jason's business, like it was the next Dell or HP. He'd say things like, "Jason's got a real eye for undervalued assets," and "Once he scales up, this thing's going to take off." I didn't argue. There was no point. They'd made up their minds about who Jason was, and who I was. He was the dreamer. I was the drone. Then, in March 2006, I lost my job. Kellerman and Associates lost their largest client, a pharmaceutical company that moved their audit work in-house. They cut 15 positions across 3 offices. I was one of them. Not performance-related, just numbers. Budget cuts. I walked out of the office on a Friday afternoon with a severance package, 2 months of continuation benefits, and a folder full of reference letters. I wasn't panicking. I had 6 months of living expenses and savings. I'd already updated my resume. I had 3 interviews lined up for the following week. But I called my parents, just to let them know, a courtesy. My mother answered on the 3rd ring. I said, "Mom, it's Rebecca." She said, "Hi, honey. What's going on?" I said, "I wanted to let you know I lost my job today. The firm had layoffs. I'm fine, I've got savings and I'm already interviewing. But I thought you should know." There was a pause. Then she said, "Oh, Rebecca, I'm so sorry." Another pause. Then she said, "We can't help you right now." I hadn't asked. She continued, "Jason's business is going through a rough patch. We're helping him stay afloat. You understand. We're stretched pretty thin." I said, "I didn't ask for help, Mom." She said, "Good, because we can't give it." I stood in my kitchen holding the phone and staring at the refrigerator. There was a magnet shaped like the Liberty Bell that my mother had given me when I bought the condo. It said Philadelphia in gold letters. I said, "Okay." She said, "You'll be fine, honey. You always land on your feet." We hung up. 2 weeks later, my father called. It was a Tuesday evening. I was making dinner. Pasta, jarred marinara, the kind of meal you make when you're tired and don't care. He said, "Rebecca, your mother and I need to talk to you about something." I turned off the stove. I said, "What?" He said, "We think it's best if you don't visit for a while." I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Jason's going through a difficult time. The business isn't doing well. He's under a lot of stress. When you come around, it makes him feel compared, like he's failing. We think it's better if we focus our energy on helping him get back on his feet without the added pressure." I said, "You're telling me not to come home because my presence stresses Jason out?" He said, "We're saying we need space to help your brother. You're doing fine. You'll find another job. Jason needs us more right now." I said, "How long?" He said, "We don't know. We'll let you know." I said, "Are you serious?" He said, "Rebecca, don't make this harder than it needs to be." I hung up. That was April 14th, 2006. I was 32 years old. I didn't speak to my parents again for 15 years. Before I keep going, I need to ask you something. Have you ever been the responsible one in your family? The one who worked hard, stayed out of trouble, and still got treated like you were less important than the sibling who couldn't get it together? If that's you, drop a comment. You're not alone. I found a new job 7 weeks later. Another auditing firm in Philadelphia, Brennan Holt and Partners. Better clients, better pay, better benefits. I sold the condo in Haverford and bought a townhouse in Chestnut Hill for $310,000. 2 bedrooms, small backyard, quiet street. I joined a running club. I started training for half marathons. I made friends who didn't know I had a brother or parents because I never mentioned them. I built a life that didn't include my family. They didn't call. I didn't either. The only person who kept me updated was my aunt, my mother's younger sister, who lived in Silver Spring, Maryland. Carol called me once a year, usually around Christmas, with updates I didn't ask for but tolerated because she meant well. In 2007, she told me Jason had shut down Tech Revive. Lost too much money, she said. Couldn't compete with bigger refurbishers. In 2010, she told me he'd started a new business, something involving day trading and investment consulting. He was calling it Marshall Capital Advisors. He was still living at home. In 2015, she told me my father had retired from Atlantic Telecom after 38 years. They were living on his pension and Social Security. In 2017, she told me my parents had downsized, sold the house on Maple Ridge Road, and moved to a smaller 2-bedroom ranch in Newark, Delaware. In 2019, she told me Jason had gotten married. A woman named Tiffany, 28 years old, worked as a stylist at a hair salon in Wilmington. They'd had a small ceremony at a bed and breakfast in Rehoboth Beach. Jason and Tiffany moved into an apartment in Bear, Delaware, 15 minutes from my parents. I said, "Good for him." I didn't ask questions. I didn't want to know more. Then, on October 12, 2021, my phone rang at 8:47 a.m. I was at my desk in my office on the 9th floor of the Brennan Holt building in Center City, Philadelphia. I'd just poured my second cup of coffee. I was halfway through a compliance report for a medical device manufacturer when the phone buzzed. Unknown number, Delaware area code. I almost didn't answer, but something, instinct, curiosity, muscle memory, made me pick up. A woman's voice said, "Rebecca?" I didn't recognize it at first. It was thin, shaky, older than I remembered. I said, "Yes?" She said, "It's Mom." The office went quiet. I could hear my own breathing. I said, "What do you want?" Her voice cracked. She said, "We're in trouble. We need your help." I said, "With what?" She said, "The IRS. They've audited us. They're saying we owe money, a lot of money. They've put a lien on the house." I set my coffee down. I said, "How much?" She said, $340,000. I didn't say anything. She continued. Her words came fast, frantic, like she'd been practicing. She said Jason had been running businesses through their address for years. He'd filed tax returns using their Social Security numbers. He'd claimed deductions that didn't exist. He'd reported income he'd never earned, and losses he'd fabricated to avoid paying taxes on the money he did make. The IRS had flagged the returns in 2019. They'd launched a full audit in 2020. It had taken them 18 months to untangle the web of fake LLCs, false deductions, and fraudulent filings. The conclusion? My parents owed $340,000 in back taxes, penalties, and interest, dating back to 2008. The IRS had placed a lien on their house. They had 90 days to pay in full or enter a payment plan. If they couldn't do either, the house would be seized and sold at auction. My mother said, "We didn't know, Rebecca. Jason told us he was handling the business taxes. He said he had an accountant. We trusted him." I said, "Where is Jason now?" She said, "Florida. He moved 3 months ago. Tiffany left him. He's not answering our calls." I stared at my computer screen. The compliance report blurred into lines of meaningless text. I said, "What do you want from me?" She said, "We need help. We need someone who understands taxes. You work in finance, don't you? Can you look at the documents? Can you tell us what to do?" I said, "I'm a forensic accountant. I investigate financial fraud. I don't fix tax problems." She said, "Rebecca, please." Her voice broke. Real tears. Not the polite kind she used at funerals or when her students gave her handmade cards. The ugly kind. She said, "Where are your parents?" I looked out the window. 9th floor. I could see the streets below. Cars moving in neat lines. People walking to work with coffee cups and briefcases. Normal people. People whose families hadn't told them to stay away because their success made someone else uncomfortable. I said. "I'll send you the name of a tax attorney." She said, "Can you help us yourself?" I said, "No." She said, "Rebecca." I said, "You told me not to come home 15 years ago because I made Jason feel bad about himself. You chose him. You chose enabling his failures over having a relationship with me. I'm sending you an attorney's name. That's all I'm doing." I hung up. My hands were shaking. I set the phone down on my desk and stared at it for a long time. She called back 16 more times over the next 3 weeks. I didn't answer. She left voicemails. The first few were desperate, pleading, asking me to reconsider, to help, to remember that they were family. The later ones were angry, accusing me of being cold, selfish, vengeful. The last one was just crying. No words, just my mother sobbing into the phone for 47 seconds before she hung up. I deleted them all. 3 weeks later, my Aunt Carol called. She said, "Rebecca, I know you and your parents aren't speaking, but I need to tell you what's happening." I said, "I know what's happening. Mom called me." Carol said, "Did she tell you they hired an attorney?" I said, "No." Carol said, "They did. The attorney negotiated a payment plan with the IRS. Your parents have to pay $2,800 a month for 15 years. They can't afford it. They're selling the house." I said, "That's not my problem." Carol said, "Rebecca, they're in their 70s. Your father's working part-time at a hardware store just to make ends meet. Your mother's substitute teaching. They made a mistake. They know they made a mistake." I said, "They made a choice. There's a difference." Carol was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You're really not going to help them?" I said, "They stopped being my parents 15 years ago. I'm not obligated to save them from the consequences of enabling Jason for 40 years." She said, "That's cruel, Rebecca." I said, "That's honest." We hung up. In January 2022, my parents sold their house in Newark for $285,000. After paying off the remaining mortgage, real estate fees, and closing costs, they cleared $140,000. They used it to make a lump sum payment to the IRS. They still owed $200,000. They moved into a one-bedroom apartment in a senior living complex in Newcastle. Subsidized rent, shared laundry room. My father took a part-time job at Lowe's, stocking shelves 3 days a week. My mother went back to substitute teaching at the elementary schools in the district. Jason, as far as I know, never contacted them. He never apologized. He never paid them back. If you're still here, you already know how this ends. But let me ask you this. When someone shows you who they are, how many chances do you give them? Hit subscribe, because the people who stay silent aren't always the ones who need to apologize. In March 2022, I received a letter at my office. Not my home address, my office. Which meant my mother had looked up Brennan Holt and Partners online and found me. The envelope was cream-colored, no return address. Inside were 4 pages of handwritten text on lined notebook paper. The handwriting was my mother's. Neat, slanted slightly to the right. The same handwriting I'd seen on birthday cards and grocery lists my entire childhood. I read it at my desk with the door closed. The letter said she was sorry. It said they'd made a terrible mistake choosing Jason over me. It said they'd been trying to help him and ended up enabling him instead. It said they understood if I couldn't forgive them, but they wanted me to know they regretted everything. The second page talked about Jason. How he'd promised them he was handling the taxes. How he'd told them the businesses were legitimate. How they'd believed him because he was their son, and they wanted to believe he'd finally figured it out. The third page talked about me. How proud they were of me. How much they'd taken me for granted. How they'd always assumed I'd be fine because I was competent and responsible and didn't need them the way Jason did. The fourth page ended with this. We failed you. We failed Jason. We failed ourselves. We don't expect you to forgive us. We don't expect you to help us. We just wanted you to know we're sorry. Love, Mom. I read it twice. Then I folded it back along the crease lines, slid it into the envelope, and put it in the bottom drawer of my desk. I didn't respond. 6 months later, Carol called again. She said my father had fallen at work. Nothing serious. He'd tripped over a box in the stockroom at Lowe's and bruised his ribs. But he was 76. He shouldn't have been lifting boxes. She said, "Rebecca, don't you think it's time to let this go?" I said, "Let what go?" She said, "Your anger, your grudge. They're suffering. They've lost everything." I said, "They didn't lose everything. They gave it away. To Jason. For 40 years. Carol sighed. She said, "You sound just like your father. Stubborn." I said, "Good." I'm 52 years old now. I live in the same townhouse in Chestnut Hill. I'm a senior forensic accountant at Brennan Holt. I manage a team of 6. I run half marathons on weekends. I've completed 14 so far. I have friends who know nothing about my family because I've never told them and they've never asked. Last year, I got a wedding invitation in the mail. My cousin's daughter, someone I'd met twice when she was a toddler, was getting married in Baltimore. The invitation listed my parents' names under family. I didn't go. I sent a card with a check for $200 and a polite note wishing her well. Carol still calls once a year. She updates me whether I want her to or not. My parents are still making monthly payments to the IRS. My father still works at Lowe's. My mother still substitutes when they need her. Jason is still in Florida. He started another business, something involving cryptocurrency and NFTs. Carol doesn't know the details. I didn't ask. I don't think about them often. When I do, it's not with anger. It's with something quieter. Relief, maybe. Or clarity. They made a choice in 2006. They chose Jason's comfort over my presence. They chose enabling over accountability. They chose short-term peace over long-term relationships. I made a choice too. I chose myself. I chose boundaries. I chose a life where I'm not responsible for fixing other people's mistakes. The letter from my mother is still in my desk drawer. I haven't thrown it away. I haven't answered it either. Maybe someday I will. Maybe I won't. What I know is this: forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation. You can acknowledge someone's apology without opening the door again. You can wish someone well from a distance and still keep them out of your life. They taught me that lesson, just not the way they intended. I don't owe them anything. Not money, not time, not absolution. Not my peace. I spent 31 years trying to earn their approval by being perfect. I've spent the last 21 years learning that my value doesn't depend on their recognition. They lost their house. They lost their savings. They lost their comfortable retirement. I didn't lose anything. I gained everything. Last month, I bought a new car, a Subaru Outback, forest green, fully loaded. I paid cash. I drove it off the lot and took myself to dinner at a restaurant in Rittenhouse Square I'd been wanting to try for 2 years. I ordered the salmon. I drank a glass of wine that cost more than the entire bottle I used to bring to family dinners. I sat alone at a table by the window and watched the city move around me. I didn't feel lonely. I felt free. The people who deserve your loyalty are the ones who show up when it's inconvenient. The ones who celebrate your success instead of resenting it. The ones who don't ask you to make yourself smaller so someone else can feel bigger. My parents weren't those people. Jason definitely wasn't. So I let them go. I let them face the consequences of their choices. I let them figure it out on their own, the way they told me to figure it out on my own. And I'm fine. Better than fine. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. If you've ever had to choose between your peace and your family's expectations, You already know what I'm talking about. And you already know it's worth it. Drop a comment. Tell me your story. I see every single one. Thank you for staying with me through this one. If this story reminded you that you don't owe anyone your suffering just because they're related to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Check the description for another story about the sibling who got everything and lost it all. Hit subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.